In this video, we are going to be looking at or continuing to look at periodization of the training year. The three phases of training that we examined in the previous section, the preparatory, competition, and transition, are used by many athletes and coaches and fitness advisors as a basis for the periodization plan. These three basic phases can be further characterized by training cycles of varying durations and objectives, referring to the microcycle, mesocycle, and macrocycles. Let's start by having a look at the microcycle. The microcycle refers to a relatively small number of training sessions that form a recurrent unit. For example, an athlete's training program may consist of a hard training day, followed by an easy day, and then a rest day. And this hard, easy rest pattern is then repeated. This would form a 3-day microcycle. Or, if a runner's typical training week consisted of a hill workout, an interval session on the track, a long run, 3 easy runs, and a rest day, and this was repeated over a number of weeks, this repetitive weekly pattern is a microcycle. Typically, a microcycle lasts for 3 to 10 days. For many athletes, a microcycle is simply 1 week's training that is repeated over a number of weeks. Whoops. You can see here where we have, up along here, we have the hill run, the interval, then we have a long run, then we have 3 easy runs, followed by a rest day. And those 7 days make up the first microcycle. Next, we're going to look at the mesocycle. Mesocycle is a block of training consisting of a number of microcycles, which emphasizes the attainment of a particular goal. The phases of training, preparatory, competition, and transition, can be thought of as distinct mesocycles, whereby the athlete is working towards achieving certain goals and objectives. Typically, a mesocycle is 4 to 12 weeks in duration. And again, looking here, we can see that there is the first mesocycle, which is made up of a microcycle, and then we have a second mesocycle in place there. Next, we look at the macrocycle. A macrocycle is made up of a number of different mesocycles. Typically, a macrocycle covers a period of 10 to 12 months. In most cases, a macrocycle represents the full training program, which is undertaken year by year, and thus the year is the largest unit of periodization. You can see up here we have one macrocycle, which is actually made up of 10 mesocycles. Next, we're going to look at an extended macrocycle. Some athletes who compete in Olympic Games every 4 years, for example, will think of longer term, and so they may use an extended macrocycle. An extended macrocycle consists of 2 to 4 macrocycles, each of which last approximately 1 year. For example, a 100-meter swimmer, like these that are on screen, might spend the first macrocycle building a base of endurance and muscular strength, with a concerted effort towards flexibility and technique. In the second macrocycle, the swimmer might work towards maintaining their endurance and muscular strength, and building on these to develop local muscular endurance while still working on flexibility and technique. In the third macrocycle, the athlete might begin to work on their speed and power and increase their competition load while maintaining flexibility and technique. During the fourth macrocycle, a large emphasis will be on power, competition, and technique, becoming more specific towards their event. All this would be considered an extended macrocycle. And there you have a world record. And that's what a world record feels like. And that's what it looks like. Let's now look at peaking and tapering. Peaking and tapering are important parts of the periodization of training. Peaking aims to allow an athlete to reach their optimal fitness to perform at a predetermined competition. For example, a training program may be designed to bring players to peak readiness during the competition in-season phase. This might be the case for sports such as Australian rules football or netball, although it is difficult to maintain optimal levels of performance, fitness, for extended periods of time. More commonly, peaking is related to preparation for an important specific event or competition, for example, a World Championship or an Olympic Games, or for a particular match within the course of a competition season, so for example, the finals. This basic approach to performance peaking is relatively simple. After weeks or months of training geared towards a particular event, there should be a decrease in training levels over the course of the final few weeks prior to the event. This reduction in training is known as tapering and allows the athlete time for recovery and for their energy stores to be fully restored. At the end of a taper, an athlete should be in peak condition and should be raring to compete. During a taper, athletes' volume of training should be reduced. However, the intensity should remain high. Let's have a look at a few questions. Do you know the content? Once again, I recommend you read the question and then pause the video and see how you go at answering it. Let's start. Question number 1. Define the term periodization. Question number 2. Define the term microcycle. Question number 3. Define the term mesocycle. And question number 4. Define the term macrocycle. Do you understand the content? Question 5. What is the usual length of a microcycle? Question 6. Explain a typical macrocycle. In your answer, use the terms microcycle, mesocycle, and macrocycle. Can you now apply the content? Question 7. Consider an athlete who is planning a 12-month periodization plan leading into an important competition. Draw up a simple periodization annual plan mapping out all of the important phases and subphases, along with the macro, meso, and microcycles. Are you ready to extend the content? Question 8. Previously, you chose a sport in which you have completed your data analysis and written the 12-month annual plan, emphasizing the appropriate phases and subphases. Now, build on your annual plan to include the macro, meso, and micro cycles. Remember, this contributes towards your next SAC. So if you're having a little bit of trouble with this, make sure you go and speak to your teacher.